hoping you do is both learn about the group process, but also become more self-aware. Thinking about, gee, how do I, as Beverly Wagner, how do I function in groups? How can the group process help me to develop? What are areas of limitations that I might have? Okay. The model that we're going to use this evening to talk about the group process and that we're going to revisit throughout our time with you this semester is called the Tuckman model. Bruce Tuckman was a psychologist, and he came up with one stage theory of groups. And I do want to say that there are other theories of how groups develop out there besides this one.
A different one is in your HUS 101 textbook.
And I think there's a different one actually in the textbook they have for this class.
Don't be confused, though.
We're not going to test you on it. Why did I pick this one? I think oftentimes we pick models that speak to us personally. For me and my work with groups, this one seemed the most relevant. But some of you may look at the one in the textbook and say this one speaks more to me. So it just depends.
So which one is true?
There is no truth. And that's probably part of becoming an HUS professional is you decide what works for you and perhaps what your truth is, but you don't necessarily assume that there's one truth that fits everybody.
Glad there's no test in this class now.
Okay, so what did Tuckman say? Tuckman said that, again, groups tend to go through certain stages. Another reason why I like Tuckman is because he's got a kind of a great rhyme going. Forming, storming, norming, performing, closure. For shizzle. Yeah. It's easy to remember. Okay, so that's part of why I like Tuckman also. Tuckman said that when groups first come together, we're forming. Now, I wasn't down here with Bonnie, but I know down in the HUS office with the 751 group, we tended to be a little more formal. And that happens during forming. We tend to be on our best behavior. Except for Bonnie. No.
That's why you sent me down here.
Yeah.
It was Ginger that we had to watch out for.
That's what I figured, yeah. During forming, though, people tend to still have on their social faces. What do we mean by that? When a group first starts, you tend to show to the world the face that you show when you go to the bank or when you go to the doctor's office.
Church.
Okay? When you go to church, perhaps, yeah. Or when you go to synagogue or wherever you go, when you're out in public, that's your social face. And that's what we tend to see in the beginning of the group process, in the forming stage. Oftentimes during the forming stage, too, this is also the orientation time. This is when people are asking questions. We've got a lot of questions tonight. How does this work? Man, this is confusing. Who came up with this idea? So orientation, you want to know how exactly does this work. So that also happens during the forming stage. When you work with groups, and I would encourage those of you that are going to go on and work in group process, you also think about other things. Where do people sit? Oftentimes people sit where they're most comfortable. I noticed tonight that Heather and Mary were sitting together. I know Heather and Mary know each other from other classes, so they sit together. Michelle and Janet sat together. They know each other from other classes. That's very common. Mandy and Allison are close to each other. They know each other from other classes. That's pretty common in groups. You sit where you're comfortable, okay? Chris is sitting where he sat in other classes with me in this room, okay?
And that's Ginger's seat.
So that's pretty common in the forming stage. You sit where you're comfortable. Oftentimes, you sit by people that might look like you. What do we mean by look like you? Age. Age is a common denominator with groups. Oftentimes, we're going to sit by people that we think might be around the same age as us. Gender. That depends. Some people will sit next to an opposite sex. Some people will sit same sex, just depending on who you are and what your comfort level is. Sometimes facial features, what people look like. That can make a difference in where you sit, okay? So in the forming stage, again, we're all pretty formal. In the forming stage, people are still looking to Bonnie and I as the instructors and less as members of the group, okay? if there's some kind of problem, you're probably going to come to us at this stage, and you want us to solve the problem for you. And as you might have guessed, as we move along in the group process, who do you think we want to solve the problems?
The group.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Use the power of the group. You're right, Mindy. Okay, questions about forming? One last piece about forming is during the forming stage, controversy is avoided. And I know just with my group you could see that. Everyone was on their best behavior. People were very conscious about not interrupting each other. And if two people spoke at the same time, both would be deferential to the other. I noticed that down there a few minutes ago. Very polite, okay? Again, that's very common for the forming stage. But Tuckman said for groups to really come together, a storming needs to take place. And if you remember before break, Janet pointed that out. She said that in her diversity class, it was stressful at times. Most people who have taken group classes or classes where we encourage groups will say that. That class is stressful, at least part of the time. Why? Well, Tuckman pointed this out. For groups to come together, some storming has to take place. When you hear that, what do you think storming might be? Or maybe you can share some of your own experience in groups. What might storming look like?
Just stop being so nice.
You stop being so nice.
Be more real.
Okay.
Disagreement.
You're willing to disagree? Okay, good.
There's confrontation sometimes.
Okay, confrontation sometimes.
Sometimes
Yeah.
During storming, people are apt to say what they really think
Yes.
versus what they think the group thinks they should think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good.
Very much.
Yes. Yes. Now, think about this. We said just a moment ago that Tuckman says that for a group to become a group, storming has to take place. Why do you think that is?
If people aren't being real, then you're not getting anywhere.
Good.
Struggle makes you bond.
Ah, struggle makes you bond.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's also true. Now, some of you have probably been part of groups before where you never got past the struggle. And has that happened to anyone? Never got past the struggle?
I got to a point where I thought that maybe what I thought was a confrontation was with somebody else. I got to a point when I had to look at me.
Okay.
Is the other person the problem or am I the problem? And I changed. Instead of changing them, I changed.
And I would say that as you came to that decision to do that, and I'm guessing maybe other people did too, that the group maybe moved more towards what we call norming. The group became closer.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Okay, let's take a closer look at what storming is. In storming, as many of you have pointed out, there's conflict, but note that Tuckman also said there's competition. Okay, competition. Part of what certainly some folks say about the group process is, and this is one theory out there about group process, that in groups that become really close, eventually we begin to show the faces that we show in our family. And some of you might tell me that at times in your families of origin, relationships can be competitive. You want to be heard, okay? You want people to hear your voice, right? And sometimes it's hard to know how to make your voice heard. That's part of becoming a human service professional, thinking about that. How can I make my voice heard? How can people hear what I have to say? Okay. So in storming, yes, there is conflict, as many of you have pointed out, but there may also be competition. Oftentimes, at this point, we tend to see a lot of talkers or dominators and people who become increasingly quiet and withdrawn. Okay? Some folks increasingly need to be heard. Some folks increasingly need to become part of the wall back there. Why? What do you think is going on there?
Let's hear from some of the people who increasingly need to disappear. Because I think the people who are going to answer are the ones who are going to dominate. I'm just saying. I'm just.
Well, I mean, if you're not, maybe you're not attending to